Thanks everyone for coming, and thank you for the introduction. My name is Kale Bruner, and I work at the museum seasonally, temporarily. I'm here currently, as Jordan said, on the International Museum and Library Services Institute grant, and part of that grant was to facilitate or to bring up to curatorial standards a few archaeological collections that the museum archaeology team has collected over the last few years, and then also to get started on our enormous Laughlin legacy collection. And so what I want to do today is just talk to you a little bit about what it's been like getting started with that legacy collection, because I'm really kind of just in the first few weeks of that aspect of my work here. I'm going to stick close to my notes to begin with so I don't forget anything, but once we get going, I'll let it go and we'll just have a conversation. And that'll be nice. Okay. Let's see if we can get this up here. Let's see if we can go back one. Okay. You've all been given a survey sheet of paper, and I have pens if anyone needs one, but we would really appreciate it if you could take the time to answer those questions and hand it back to Karen or Thomas on your way out, or myself is fine. We're just trying to get a sense of what the museum can do to better serve the community. Okay. So as Thomas mentioned, we do have one more lecture in this or presentation in this series. And so our upcoming one will be on Thursday, September 15th, here at 6 p.m. And this will be a little more free-form. I'm going to talk about what, from my perspective and from the museum's perspective, archaeology is going to look like and has been looking like for the 21st century here for Aleutian archaeology. And so we have a lot of exciting research happening via the museum. We're facilitating a lot of research. We have a small amount of our own that's ongoing, and we're going to talk a lot more about that next week. So, but for tonight, I want to take a look at, just give you an idea of what this legacy collection of William Laughlin's work at Nikolski looks like for us. In general, the Museum of the Aleutians was founded in 1999 with the mission to collect, preserve, and advocate for the natural and cultural history of the Aleutian region. The museum's been open since 1999. You may not realize this, but in addition to the items we have on display, the exhibits that we have open for the public, the museum also serves as a repository for archaeological and other research-based collections. Our capacity is around 2,000 cubic feet. We're currently somewhere around half of that in terms of what we have in the building. And the Laughlin collection, which we accepted in 1999 upon our opening, takes up about a third of what we have in the building currently. So it's a lot to work through, as you know. So what this means is that as a repository is that the museum collections has a storage facility that is state-of-the-art in terms of climate controlled and security. So items can be safely stored and accessible for research. That's one of the key aspects of being a repository, to make these items accessible for research. But as you'll see with the Laughlin collection, if we don't know for sure what's in it, we can't make it accessible to researchers. And so that's the goal here, is to work that and towards that. So as a regional repository, our collections include materials that are owned by others. The majority of what we have is owned either by the Unalaska Corporation, the Bureau of Land Management, or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. And I'm speaking of our large archaeological collections when I say that. Upon his retirement in 1999, William Laughlin transferred to the museum most of his research materials. That included all of the archaeological material collected over several decades of excavations, which is a substantial amount, including from Chaluka Mound, which we'll talk about a little more. Nikolski. And then after his death in 2001, his family sent much of the remainder of his material, some of it archaeological, but a lot of it was archives. His library, his photographs, his field photographs, his personal photographs, lots of personal items, and all of these things become part of the record and of those archaeological investigations and research that Laughlin was involved in. And so they're important components to the collection itself. And so my work here, and I'm just getting started, is to get together an inventory to begin and to bring these materials up to curatorial standards in terms of how they're stored and labeled, and conserve anything that's in need of conservation that hasn't been. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about Laughlin's work at Chalukka, which is a prominent archaeological site at Nikolski on Omak Island. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the site itself, and then I'm going to talk about what working with what we call the legacy collection has been like so far. The legacy collection is that of retired or deceased researchers whose archives, personal notes, et cetera, are important pieces of the curated archaeological collection. But I also want to take a minute to say that I'm not the first one to attempt this monumental task. There have been other members of the community who've worked on this and volunteered as employees before me, and most notably, Sean Dixon did a lot to get the archives together for a lot of the personal items, especially when they came in after 2014, I think. And then Larissa Syverson dove pretty deep into the Chalukka inventory and made a really good inventory that is still useful for me today. So thank you, Larissa. Okay. So William Laughlin is maybe someone you've heard of before, or maybe you haven't. He's was a prominent researcher in the Aleutians in the 60s and 70s, especially. He was an archaeologist, but an anthropologist. He brought together a conglomerate of researchers, multidisciplinary research team in the Aleutians and at Nikolski to study language, biology, including at that time a lot of blood groups. But I think you'd be pretty impressed with the genetic work that's being done today. It is after him. And he really brought this all together to try to understand this very, very unique adaptation here in the Aleutian Islands that the Aleutian have managed over 9,000 years of occupation in the Aleutian Islands. We don't see a maritime adaptation like this anywhere else in the world. And so Laughlin was sort of at the forefront in research in a lot of ways by bringing this multidisciplinary team together, by making excellent friends, lifelong friends with residents of Nikolski and the other places that he worked. He pioneered in the 1970s and 80s, in the height of the Cold War. He had a research partnership with a team from a Soviet research team, and here they are visiting the Chalukka site in 1974, I believe. This is Laughlin. I think he's wearing the referee shirt. And he's explaining something about the stratigraphy, I'm sure, but they're all, listening intently. He had a great number of women on his excavation teams, university students which was unusual at the time. And he also invited locals to excavate with him. And so here we have two of the I think it's Dushkin. I think it's Claire and Marcia Dushkin, along with the remainder of the excavation team here in also in the 1970s. If you haven't read or flipped through this book, we really need to get it back in our gift shop. It's really an excellent summary of his decades of research. This book was published in 1980. Laughlin himself was born in 1919. He earned a PhD from Harvard University in 1949, and he went on to be a professor, have stints as professors at first the University of Oregon, then on to Wisconsin, and finally to the University of Connecticut, where he served as a distinguished professor until he retired in 1999. His work in the Aleutians began as a doctoral student at Harvard, undoubtedly with meager funding, but he was, by the time his work was in full swing in the 60s, he was well funded by the National Science Foundation, a prestigious granting agency, and he also was a member of Sigma Chi, an academic, prestigious academic association. So his initial work at Nikolski was part of his dissertation research, but then he went on to adopt that anthropological multidisciplinary research program. And one of the really critical elements to Laughlin's work, which he acknowledges himself in the preface of most of his writings, are the people of Nikolski who he befriended him, I should say, and participated in the research, answered lots of questions about fishing and hunting in the region for him to help him understand some of the stone tools and bone tools that he was excavating from thousands and thousands of years ago, and to bring those into more of a living perspective, to hear from people whose ancestors had used them. Typically in academic verbiage, we call these people informants, but I think it's very much worth acknowledging them individually with their names. And so we have a Finnegan and May Ermeloff, and for the life of me, I could not find a photo of May, but I'm sure there's one in there somewhere that'll turn up. Eva Cherkasin, and over here, and Sergei and Agnes Sovorov, George Vasezikov, and Pauline Val Dushkin. So, the site of Chalupa. I personally have never been. I've never been to Nikolski. I need to remedy that. I very much want to get over there and see. But Chalupa is an enormous archaeological site. It's a huge cultural mound, and it stands about 200 feet by 700 feet by 200 feet long. I'll show you a map in a minute. It's a National Historic Landmark. It's been recognized as such since 1985 on the National Register of Historic Places. It's among the longest continually inhabited places in North America. In fact, going back about 4,000 years of occupation there. In fact, if you can see in these barabras in the house here, this picture was taken in 1938 during a Smithsonian expedition to Lunak. This is right on top of the Chalupa Mound, and so even into the 20th century, people were still living on Chalupa, and indeed it's right in town of Nikolski, so we can consider it occupied to this day. Again, just some of the locals in Nikolski in the 70s and the 50s who were actively engaged in entertaining the children and the research there with Finnegan. So here's the mound I'm talking about. It's the town of Nikolski is mostly over here, but this is the church for those of you who are familiar. Nikolski Bay, Armagnac Lake, and the creek, which is a very good salmon run, I understand. And then this is the mount, and you can even see a couple of structures still on top. These trenches that you see are former excavations, and so you can even from Google Earth we can still see the signs of the archaeology. And although you'll see in the photos, Laughlin and his team over the years moved a lot of dirt, there's still a lot of the mound that's intact. So the mound consists of layers of cultural debris, interstratified, or let's say layer caked up with volcanic ashfall deposits, and even a tsunami deposit or two were in there. The stratigraphy at Choluca is interestingly unpublished, and so that's one of the things I really hope we can get into in the archives, the Laughlin archives, and get some good depictions of the stratigraphy out there for research purposes. But the mound itself stands about 20 feet high, and that is 20 feet of cultural material accumulating over about 4,000 years. So it's a substantial occupation site, a village. And the debris that is in the, that composes the mound is anything from just your average organic enriched dirt, because people have been living on that surface and tossing a few animal bones and some chipstone and this and that, to then you get layers that are dense pockets of shellfish and fish bone discarded. We call that midden. And then house floors and house roof collapse, for example, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very complicated and rich site. And you can see here, here's Laughlin, always with the pipe, and this is getting started. The trenches that they dug were enormous by our standards. I mean, if you look at a modern archaeological excavation, we take a summer, and we're lucky if we make it through 3 or 4 square meters. And Laughlin was digging about exponentially, an exponential speed, but still recorded very good stratigraphy and very good provenience of artifacts. So his trenches ranged from about, say, 6 feet to as long as 100 feet, and they'd usually be about 4 to 6 feet wide. You can see the amount of dirt being moved here. It's quite a bit. This picture is from 1952. It was they're just breaking ground on top of Choluca at this time, and that's the a crew from the that Laughlin brought out from the University of Oregon. He left the research in 1956, I believe was his last year on Choluca. For a while, he did some other work around the Aleutian Islands, but then came back to Choluca in 1962, 1963, and then again in 1970, 71, 72, 73, and 74. So last time I mentioned a sequence for the Aleutian Islands, and mostly this applies to the eastern Aleutian Islands, where we have some of our oldest sites falling into this early Anagula phase at 9,000 to 7,000 years before present BP. So Choluca, here they are again examining the stratigraphy. I love these photos. Choluca, the base layers at Choluca are about 4,000 years old. So they're contemporaneous with our sites here at Margaret Bay, at Macnac Bridge. And in fact, at the bottom layers of Choluca, we get these stone-lined houses, very similar, very reminiscent to what was uncovered at Margaret Bay and Macnac Bridge. And then, of course, we have then continuous occupation through these phases, the Margaret Bay phase, the Macnac phase, the Aleutian tradition, and then again, I mentioned even the historic and even the modern period at this location. So also I want to mention that we the dates need to be revised a little bit, but we have a pretty secure start date for Choluca between 4,000 and 3,000 years ago. Laughlin began dating Choluca with radiocarbon method at the very first few years that method was available. And so he was really on the forefront of research in so many ways, really pushing the envelope. But we also know that a lot of those early dates are not terribly reliable. And so they need to be redone, but we're not talking about a difference of thousands of years. We're talking about an error of maybe a few hundred years. And so we could get a firmer grasp on the stratigraphy and the aging or the dating at Choluca with, if we can grab some of these carbon samples out of the legacy collection and we we can get some new dates. So that's another long-term goal with this collection. So the site was well established by 4,000 years ago, as I said, and we're not sure what exactly the draw was. It's an excellent location for resources. There's a reef nearby. About 4,000 years ago, is the timing when we know sea levels really stabilized after the sort of initial rise in sea level after the glaciers were started melting away. And so by 4,000, we know that that's when sea level really kind of was stable. So reefs can develop. So salmon runs can begin to take shape in these creeks and lakes. And so it's no surprise that the site is located where it is, because the reef is there, because the salmon run is there. And we think that stabilizing of the environment is what caused the initial sort of settlement in that location, and then it seemed it must have been a very good spot to be inhabited so long. So what does the archaeological record look like? I'm borrowing these from the legacy collection. These are Laughlin's artifact plates. They're much better than any photo I'm going to be able to take. And so you see the typical array of artifacts, including evidence for fishing with these fishing weights, the grooved cobbles to hold down a line, either a fishing line or a net, or keep it vertical when you're netting. We have stone bowls, stone lamps, and grinding stones. This is sort of the general inventory of the ground stone tools, as we call them. On the theme of fishing, which interestingly, the sort of initial analyses of the material from Chalukya indicate that in terms of change through time, fishing was more prominent at Chalukya than other locations in the eastern Aleutians, and that fishing seems to have, although they started out in equal proportions, fishing to sea mammal hunting, fishing seems to have been more steady, and the fishing technology is more prevalent throughout the profile at Chalukya. So sticking with fishing, we've got these fish hooks, including, these are some relatively small ones, that's about 10 centimeters, about 4 inches. But of course, these can be these compound fish hooks where this is the shank and this is the hook. They'd be lashed together to form a hook shape. And then these come in all sizes, including large enough for halibut. These are not halibut size hooks here, but those were used. Root diggers, another common artifact type. We have obviously lots of plant resources to be harvested seasonally in the Aleutian Islands, and there's ample evidence that the folks in Chalukya were making use of those. Decorative objects like these pins and bobbins, this one with a little bird head carved on the top. And then, of course, needles, eye needles, and I call these nipple needles where there's a groove around the edge. But these eye needles for sewing. In total, there were 43 different layers recognized in the stratigraphic profile at Chalukya. And as I said, those 43 layers span about 4,000 years. And then the stone tool inventory. We have, let's get back. There we go. One thing that's important about the work at Chalukya, and when we look at the different projectile types and the bone tool projectile and harpoon types, it's not dramatically different than anywhere else in the eastern Aleutians. It's very similar. And so these early excavations in the 60s and 70s sort of established the baseline for what we know about Aleutian archaeology to begin with. And so the work that Rick Knecht, for example, did here later in the 90s and the 2000s, is just expanding the geographic range of what we know to be a very intensely occupied Aleut or Aleutian zone. And so there's nothing, what I mean to say is that we don't see regional differences in the archaeological record. The regional differences, we see a little bit in house styles here and there, but mostly we see continuity across the chain, and especially during these 4,000 years, the most recent 4,000 years. So the stone tool types are pretty typical for other locations, including here at Unalaska Bay. A range of spear points attached to a spear or a dart projectile. We have knives, probably hafted and used, with a bone or wood handle. Scrapers for flushing bird skins, etc. And then here's what an actual projectile might have looked like with a barbed harpoon. Here we have a hole for a line dart with a stone blade inset here and latched on. Same situation here. The height of the population at Chalukka is estimated to have occurred around 3,200 years ago. So we have an initial settlement at 4,000, height of population at 3,200 years ago. And it's estimated by the time that Russians arrived in the area that there was probably about 200 or 300 people living at Chalukka. And Chalukka was one of 22 villages on Umnak at that time, and the entire population of Umnak was thought to be upwards of 3,000 people. So a good 10% of the island's population was at Chalukka. So now I want to move into kind of just a little bit of show and tell, what the artifacts from Chalukka that we have here in the museum look like. In some ways, they're very typical. In some ways, there are some surprises. We haven't unpacked all of them, so we pulled out a few items that are remarkable to show examples of. As I mentioned, fishing was pretty prominent, and so we have an example of those fish hooks right here. And then this is typical, just bone flakers for making stone tools. Here are the stone tools being made with those flakers, and then worked bone. We call these drill caps. They're for working with a bow drill for making fire. There are a few unusual things that I wanted to show you were these are the smallest bone points I've ever seen looking at a range of Aleutian collections. And I wanted to juxtapose this with also the largest root digger I've ever seen, but I couldn't get the root digger in my frame to take a photo. So believe me, it's this big. Just one big piece of bone. A few surprises in the collection that I wasn't expecting. Mammoth fur, woolly mammoth fur, collected in Russia as part of his international exchange with the Soviets in the 1970s. And I believe he visited in 1980. That was unusual. I should mention that Laughlin not only worked in the Aleutians, but he worked across the Arctic and in Siberia as well. So we actually house quite a bit of material here from Greenland and Siberia that's part of the Laughlin collection, in addition to the Aleutian material. The archives, the Laughlin archives include so many fascinating things. Photographs, as I mentioned, photographic record of not only the excavations, but of the artifacts and the stratigraphy of the sites, et cetera. We have the field notes, and this is nice because this is color-coded stratigraphic profile in a field book from 1974. So that's going to make whoever jumps into the Anguilla Blade site analysis really happy when they find that. And then these random photographs on a runway with a priest. That's Laughlin, I'm not sure. This is the crew from the Soviet Union who came to excavate in 1970s, I think it was 74 with Laughlin. And I'm trying to identify this person. If anyone knows who she is, I would really love for you to tell me, so we can get that noted down. I haven't found any names on any of the photographs for her yet. Did you say something, Jim?
It looks like Augie's mom.
Augie Smith? Yeah? Would that be a crew call?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I can't read this.
Yeah.
But it could, it could be seen.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
She's in a lot of the photographs, and I haven't found one labeled with names yet. So, yeah, if anyone want to come look at some more photos, maybe it'll jog your memories. That would be great. That would be great. In any case, so the collection, the archives include, artifacts, but also this incredible photographic and documentary record. And, typical just bags and bags, boxes and boxes of flakes and iPhone tools. And then for me, it was kind of fun because a lot of Laughlin's personal items came along with this legacy collection. And so I had a really good time looking through these items. This typewriter is portable. I imagine him carrying this out to Nikolski with him to make notes or what have you. In fact, I saw an earlier photograph of Finnegan Ermelop in 1952, and he's standing next to Laughlin's microscope box, which this is the microscope in the box. And so that was just, that's just a really neat piece of history to get to look at it and to know where it came from, where it's been. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Mail, these boxes, which I've seen in other photographs at his office. Essentially, when William Laughlin died, his family cleared out his desk and sent it to us. And so we have all these items that were on his desk, the box that holds the pictures, this amazing leather case. These things are artifacts in and of themselves that are part of the Aleutian sort of legacy in a way. And then I'm particularly, anyone who knows me knows I love this one, right? He had this collection of pebbles. He had this collection of pebbles mixed in with his desk material. And because who doesn't pick up a pretty rock when you see one on the beach, And so I just imagine all the beaches Laughlin walked on and picking up a rock each time. And here they are.
So it's just a random collection of rocks.
And they're going to stay as part of our research collection. Yeah, absolutely.
And she's a Jasper.
So right. And, so it's been a fun project. Like I said, I'm just getting started. All of these things will stay here at the museum. We have handed off a little bit of the Laughlin archives to University of Alaska Anchorage's. What library is that called, Karen?
Is the University of Alaska Anchorage and APU's Consortium Library and their special collections.
Yes, and so his much of his written work is there, although we do still have some of the field documentation here. So, yeah. Anyway, it's been really interesting, really fun getting to sort of walk in his footsteps in a way through his items, but also really looking forward to bringing that Chaluka collection up to, a standard and a condition where it can be we can facilitate research with it here, because it's a really, really important collection. And I showed you some pictures and I talked about its age, but there's a lot of questions that can be answered with that material. And I think that it's really going to be a collection that can be used, revisited again and again and again with new research questions as they come up over the years. So, in any case, at this point, I just want to thank the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the International Corporation for Rep, as always, Nikolski residents past and present for their facilitating Laughlin's work in their home, KUCB for reporting for us, and thank you all for being here. I appreciate your attention. I am more than happy to take any questions, have discussion. I'd like to hear your inputs. Yeah.
Kale, what is the age of the weights that you showed?
The fishing
rock?
weights?
Yeah.
The fishing weights. So of course, stone can't be dated directly.
Yeah.
But stratigraphically they occur throughout the profile.
Yeah.
So it's and that's true across the Aleutians. We see them, as some of the first, even with the first occupations in a location, they're bringing or making and using fishing weights in those locations at that time.
So my second question is, what in the world did they use for the line? They didn't invent nylon until 1930s.
Laughlin reports working with, and I'm going to get the name wrong. I think it was Agnes Sofroff, and looking at a 72-meter long line of kelp that they were still using to fish halibut in 1950.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. So the kelp would be woven into line, and probably netting as well. Yeah.
That's really awesome.
What kind of shellfish remains do you see in the Aleutians or in the Eastern Aleutians?
In the Eastern Aleutians, a lot of blue mussel, cockles, and then urchin as well, which isn't technically, you correct me, but I'm shellfish.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, and in various sort of proportions at times, but these tend to be, they seem to look like not separated in time so much that there's an urchin population and then there's a mussel population and then there's a cockle population. But it seems to be this season is the season to harvest blue mussels, and we're making, we're dumping all the trash here, and then then it's the urchins.
Yeah. Do you see Titan and Limpet at all?
Yeah, they do show up. They do show up, but not in the same kind of numbers usually. Yeah.
You mentioned that Laughlin did some excavation in Siberia, and I'm curious, what did he find there? Was there similarities to the peoples over here, or did things change, or could you kind of see the correlation of what they did there, and then as they moved east over this direction, is there similarities?
It's a great question. One of the things Laughlin was really trying to track down was the Siberian connection to all Native American groups, and he was and then more specifically the origins of this very specific maritime adaptation of Anungan and the Aleutian Islands. And so, he was over there. I don't know the details of his work there, but I'm sure those questions are what took him there. And, the title of that book that he published in 1980, is first couple of slides, sorry, Travis. He wrote a book called Aleutians, Survivors of the Bering Land Bridge. And I don't know if everyone's familiar with the Bering Land Bridge, but it's this dry piece of land that was exposed that connected Siberia and Alaska during the Ice Age when sea levels were much lower. And we know that people lived on this land bridge, we call it Beringia, for probably thousands and thousands of years, made their homes there. And it was only, around 12,000 years ago when sea levels started to rise that people had to kind of scatter either to North America or back to Siberia. And so Laughlin was the first to sort of push the theory that the people who settled here 9,000 years ago in the Eastern Aleutians were actually kind of following that southern margin of the Beringia, and had a coastal adaptation in Beringia. And then as the sea levels rose, they just sort of stayed on the coastline and moved, and ended up in Unalaska and Umnak, basically, at the terminus of the Bering Land Bridge is what he called it. And so he saw the Anungan adaptation being something that's so ancient that could probably trace back to Beringia itself. And so it's really an American adaptation is what it seems to be, what we're kind of where we're at today, but I think he was still looking for the roots of it in Siberia.
So predisposed, what you're saying.
Yeah, well, it's a good one. It's an easy read. It's made for interested people. It's not written in academic language. It's really worth it. We need it in the bookstore. Director.
They're at the library, you could check them out at the library.
There must be copies at the library as well, yeah. Questions? Okay. Yeah, go for it. Judah.
The stone tools.
Yeah.
How much of those tools were like obsidian or even fine grained volcanics?
So I don't think that's been quantified because there's not really been a full analysis done. But I do think that obviously obsidians are always noticed, right? It's there. Yeah. But it seems to be a lot of the tools are being that typical, just black, volcanic. It's not basalt, maybe it's a trachyte, but you know the one I mean, the one we all call basalt, right?
Yeah.
And it's a lot of that, and it's a lot of argillite. I guess there's a lot of argillite around Nikolski Bay.
So maybe solidified argillite?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah, so it's like green and cherry, but it's kind of tough. It's a lot tougher than obsidian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Trachyte, really?
That's what
I'm just
Yeah, Jude?
Too much to ask back to the weights.
No, sure. Let's look at it. Yeah. We don't have to look at the pebbles. There you go. And I mean, apparently they're just ubiquitous. Apparently there were so many. Oh yeah. The lamps and the hoods are a little less common, but in comparison, but a lot of fishing. I think there's a weir there now, isn't there? If I'm not mistaken, on the creek. That's good. Yeah. At Chalupa.
So the obsidian, I mean, when it is found, there obviously had to be a quarry somewhere, right? Because I mean, you don't just find obsidian just laying around. So
Most of the time.
would they be trading for this particular? You think it would be highly sought after, right?
Yeah. Yes, and we see that across the eastern Aleutians. The obsidian comes from a couple of sources that we know where they are geographically. We know where they occur on the islands, and people either made the trek themselves to acquire that obsidian, and bring it back to their central places, villages, or someone was controlling a trade. And there's no direct evidence that points, or I should say, there's no strong evidence that points directly to trade. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't the case. But we don't know.
It'd be like a Jeff Bezos, like
Right.
the quarry,
Yeah.
found all the obsidian.
Exactly. But so the sources, and it'd be interesting to compare quantities of obsidian types on Umnak to those on Unalaska, for example. But on Unalaska here, we see a mix of Okmok, stuff that comes from Umnak Island, but the source is close to the crater. Like you have to hike up quite a ways up the mountain to get to it, I understand. And then the other source that we see here in Unalaska Bay comes from Akatan. but it's a cobble source on the beach at Akatan, but it's right on the pass. So it has its own challenges to get to, right, from here. And, but I don't know if that proportion is the same at Nikolski, at Chalukah, or if there's more heavy reliance on Akmak than Akatan. That'd be a great question to hit with the hit the collection with.
So, how many feet deep is the ice? Apparently, the water, and then however deep it is needs to be dry, so an immense amount of water.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're looking at a difference of about 300 feet from sort of the lowest point to the sea level today. So the seas for the last 12,000 years have been rising more quickly between 12 and 9,000 years ago. A little slower between 9 and 4,000 years ago, and really slow until recently.
The ice is at a Fremont or something?
Right, and so it's complicated. So sea level is complicated here, but in essence, we're looking at 300 feet of sea level rise in the last 12,000 years, right? But we also have a situation here in the Aleutian Islands where the land is moving as well. So the sea is rising fairly steadily, and the land is rising very episodically and unpredictably. And so one of the reasons it rises is because the weight from the ice, from the glaciers, is removed as the climate warmed up at the end of the ice age. And we have isostatic rebound, which is the bouncing back up of the landmass. And then we also have tectonic uplift here, which is kind of a steady, slow creep upwards. And it's affecting all of the islands, but not necessarily all at the same pace. And so establishing where the sea level is at any given time is a challenge out here.
Okay. Do you think there's archaeological sites at the bottom of the Bering Sea?
Yeah.
Have they ever found any? Has anybody ever sent a submarine down and identified any?
I'm not aware of any underwater, like for example, at the Bering Land Bridge area,
Yeah.
or around here.
The Bering Land Bridge area.
Yeah, the Bering Land Bridge. So that submerged landmass that was exposed for thousands and thousands of years. Yeah, connecting Siberia and Alaska. I'm not aware of any archaeological programs at the moment. It's 200 plus feet of water, and so I don't know the feasibility of doing underwater archaeology at those depths. I think that's deeper than.
It would seem like small camp. Our small camp on Kodiak Island that during the 1960s.
Right. Yeah.
Covered that village with water.
Yeah.
That's like,
Did it subside? There was land. The land went down.
yeah.
And that easily could happen in any kind of fault section anywhere around here. So we could get buried sites that aren't even submerged sites. That aren't even, dating to the early Holocene or the last 9 or 10,000 years. Yeah. But like the ones on Beringia would be, right? Those would be very old because that landmass was exposed so long ago. But around here, because of geologic impacts, you could potentially get very young sites underwater if the land rises suddenly from an earthquake. Yeah. And then in these bay systems, which are much more shallow than the open water of the Bering Sea, there's still the potential that sea level rise over the last 9,000 years or so has submerged sites that were once, on dry land further out from the shore that we have today. So, yeah.
In the shelf, like 600 feet deep.
Is that? Well, I know that it gets down 600 feet in some places. I don't know the exact depth of the Bering Sea.
Because it would only be on the shelf, wouldn't be on the abyss. Way too
Well, yeah, right. It would have to be on the shelf, but then there's gradients to that as well. So it gets much more shallow. For example, when you move north from here, it becomes more shallow. Actually, the Pribilofs are high points on that Bering Land Bridge. They were mountains, and now they're
Yeah, that's amazing.
islands in the ocean.
Volcano. Pribilofs volcanic. They haven't blown up for a long time.
Not in my lifetime.
There are some recent volcanics
Are there?
on St. Paul, yeah.
Recent as in Holocene,
I think so.
last 10,000 years.
And Mammoth on.
Yep. Mammoth did not swim there. They're left over from the Bering Land Bridge.
I read somewhere the only reason they thought they died off was because they didn't have any fresh water there.
So you subscribe to small.
Yeah, there's no like lakes or anything for fresh water. So.
There's been a lot of change here in the last 9,000 years.
Is there any evidence of catastrophic die-off with some of the ash layers?
In terms of the
Well, you can
animal or
imagine
humans?
a society, and then say Okmok erupts. You have column collapse of the eruption cloud, and maybe it might cause a problem.
We certainly have that here in Unalaska Bay, where we had our earliest known occupations are 9,000 years old, out on Hot Island out here in the bay, and immediately over that small residence or campsite, immediately on top of it we have the caldera-forming eruption pyroclastic flow from a cushion that happened about 9,000 years ago. And so geologically they look pretty simultaneous, although the camp was there first and then the flow came. But we don't know if that camp had been abandoned for, years, hundreds of years even, or days, or that people were there at the time of the flow, of the absolutely catastrophic pyroclastic flow would have killed anything and everything in its path, absolutely. And then what we do know is that Unalaska Bay wasn't really significantly inhabited again for at least 1,000 or 1,500 years. And then, even then, it was kind of seems to be a slow trickle back into the area. And so that volcanic eruption certainly changed the environment here to make it pretty unhospitable for people to be here.
Imagine it changed the fishing.
I would think,
Yeah.
I would think. I mean, you think of all that, like that loose, unconsolidated sediment hitting the ocean floor, and even though it's cooled down, it's changing the temperature and the chemistry in the immediate surrounding area. So it'll be a while before the fish
came back,
recovers. And then the ocean currents carry all that sediment away, so it's not left behind for us to see the evidence. Well, everybody, thank you. This has been fantastic. I appreciate your comments and discussions tonight.